Alain, great to see you, my friend.
Jesse, it is great to be with you. I'm so looking forward to our conversation here today.
Likewise, we were introduced by the mighty and powerful Jordan Mendoza, who you did his podcast as well. And he's doing amazing things in the world and creating great content and leaving a legacy. He's helped a lot of people through that platform, whether it's connections, whether it's with what he could do to help them grow their businesses and things like that. So I'm glad we were able to connect.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Just in that, you're already touching on one of the secret sauces of leadership, which is the power of connection, realizing it really doesn't matter what business we are in the people business. And so recognizing how can I help those around me to grow and excel? And that's what obviously is happening here with Jordan and then us connecting here today.
I'm very interested to dive deep into that world. I found through my life and my career, it's always about the relationships first. And you have to be prepared. You have to have the right information so that you can perform when the time comes. But if you don't have somebody to shake a hand with or, get in the proverbial door, none of that stuff really matters.
Completely. So yeah, it really starts with people and building your network. Obviously, at some point is going to come along. You're going to need to have some kind of content creation and competence, but you need to be able to develop those relationships. And I think a challenge and a trap that a lot of people fall into is that they think, oh, I need to create something completely 100% and have it finished first before I start going out and generating those relationships. And the fact is, these don't happen separately from each other. You need to be developing relationships consistently and on an ongoing basis so that you can, when the time comes, share. You've got the relationship already in place. So then you can share, oh, by the way, I have this thing. And then look, the fact is everyone knows that they will buy more or they will do business with people that they know, they like, and they trust. And so you want to be building those relationships before you need them because the goal really is to be of service.
100%. Two big points there at the end. Know, like, and trust, and be of service. We've never talked about business before, and we've just got acquainted over the last couple of weeks through emails and one, Zoom call. But I say those exact words every time I talk to somebody, specifically prospects or people that can get me in front of, target audience for my business. Is people do business with those that they like, know, and trust. And so it's amazing that this concept isn't, just it's worldwide because you're not in the United States right now.
Yeah, I'm American by birth, but right now I'm living in Europe. I'm living in the Netherlands, just in a little city called Leiden, which is just south of Amsterdam. And yeah, I mean, the rules apply. Again, I've worked in 25 countries around the world. And the fact is, we might all speak different languages and have different cultures, but we all have the same central nervous system design. And the fact is, when people know, like, and trust us, it actually lets our nervous systems relax. We're no longer on guard. So you might be familiar with the term psychological safety. So again, whether you're working with a team internally at a company or you're building a new relationship with a client or anyone else, you want to make the people around you feel safe. And I always say, like, my litmus test for psychological safety is, how there's some people, Jesse, that you're around them, they make you feel really smart, that you feel like whatever you say sounds great. And then there are other people that you're around, you feel like you have to walk on eggshells and you have to reread your emails 6 times and have someone else proof them before you send them out. Well, that's clearly a function of how psychologically safe you feel in those moments. So one of the biggest jobs that we have as leaders, and by the way, when we talk about leadership here today, I just want to give a big headline. I'm not talking about a position or a job title. Leadership is something that all of us do every day. In fact, anytime that you're trying to influence anyone, and this could be just yourself, but anyone else for that matter too, anytime you're trying to influence somebody to get something done, that takes leadership. And so we're all trying to do that in all aspects of our lives, whether that's personal life, professional life, really anywhere and everywhere. So when it comes to being great leaders, it starts by understanding that we are the CEO, and those initials here stand for Chief Energy Officer, is that it's up to us to set the emotional tone. I'm sure we've all had the experience that emotions are contagious, and the emotions of leaders are the most contagious. So we need to be able to step back and realize, what kind of energy am I putting out there that other people are going to catch so that they can feel safe enough to start to know me, to like me, and to trust me.
That's huge. Yeah, it's all, and it even ties into cognitive biases too. I mean, people, that likability factor when you first meet somebody, and that trust that you build is key to having a good relationship. And those things can be strengthened for sure over time. But if you just feel like, I've had relationships with people in and out of business where you just feel like something's off, or you feel like something's like not genuine, or there's like a almost an immediate mistrust. It's like it's hard to get around that. So I think for you, what you also said that caught my attention was being of service. And again, something that I'm highly into myself. I was actually part of a mastermind called Fit for Service last year. And Fit for Service is this concept, to be start off with physical fitness, health and wellness, but it bleeds into spiritual fitness and emotional fitness and financial fitness. Before you can serve somebody else, you have to be fit of those things before you could be helpful. And I think that the servant type of mentality is all of the great leaders that I've had the pleasure to be around, and becoming a leader myself, I've always felt that servant leadership was the way to go. I always felt that giving and being, it's almost like that. I'm a big fan of the older movie now, 300, and how Leonidas and the story of the hot gates in Thermopylae, it showed the difference between what a manager was and what a true leader was. He was ready to die with his people in the front lines, die on his shield, because he believed so much in his people, the cause of freedom, and he was not afraid to lead from the front. And that's so attractive to people when you're building an organization and you're building something that people will follow you to the ends of the earth if you will follow them. It's like a 360 circle. It's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as you talk about that, the need for us to realize that as leaders, and you talk about service, is, at its core, leadership isn't a position or a job title. It's a relationship. And it's based on this idea that there's nothing I would ask you to do that I won't do myself. And also recognizing that if I'm the leader, that ultimately it's not about me. And it's not about you. It's actually about what is the bigger picture mission, that we're all here. And sometimes that means me stepping back. I'll tell you a story about this. I was volunteering for a leadership development organization years ago, and we used to hold these weekend trainings where people could go, leadership development training. And I was on the staff selection committee. So people who had been through the training had the opportunity to apply to be members of staff afterwards, to go back and kind of be of service. But there was it was very competitive, and we always had more applicants than we had people that we had spaces for. And I remember being part of the staff selection committee and going through the process and realizing that, I had applied to staff, but frankly, given the needs of the training weekend, that it might have made sense for me to not actually show up and do the weekend. And in fact, it wasn't. In that case, I ended up waitlisting myself, even though I was on the selection committee, because I realized what served the weekend best was not necessarily having me on there. Now, it turned out a couple of people had to cancel, so I did get on the training, but it just taught me this huge lesson, and I remember telling people about that, and they said, well, you're on the committee. I mean, you kind of talk about the perfect cronyism. I mean, you get to decide. But I think if more of us in more situations were willing to go, you know what, maybe the best thing for this to happen in the best way right now is for me not to be on the top of the heap. But that means really parking your ego. And I'm really grateful that I've had mentors who taught me that lesson, because I don't think I would have learned it on my own.
I love that you bring that up, because ego is something that we all have, and it can be used for good or bad. But there's also a lot of times when people's ego get way too big for their britches, so to speak. And so, there's a lot of, I'm not sure if you follow this, but I feel this has been coming for decades. But I think that there's a consciousness awakening, and it's also part two, understanding, how your ego is and how you show up in the world, and, how you leave people, and in the mentality of leaving people better than you found them, kind of thing. And what's been your experience with working on, even for you, and then maybe bleeding that over into clients that you work with, and helping them utilize their ego for good, essentially, and show up better for their clients, their employees, themselves, all that?
Yeah. I love how you talk about the idea of the ego for good, because there is a healthy ego. When we say no ego, what we're saying is we don't want the ego that is going to basically steamroll and be a train wreck everywhere else. I mean, the fact is, a healthy ego has got that drive to achieve. It has that desire to be seen. So this is the paradox, because, as a leader, I love to be seen. And I also realize it's not about me. So I think part of this embracing this idea of suppressing or periodically, temporarily suppressing the ego is we have to learn how to embrace paradox. That things aren't all this or all that. It's not either or. It's a both and. And so, so certainly, having that healthy ego. So, for example, getting really clear on what's your vision. And the fact is, you can't get clear on your vision until you're really clear on what your values are that drive your behavior. So one thing that I do with a lot of leaders that I either train or coach is I have them go through and I give them a list of 50 common personal behavioral values, ranging from anything to safety, to adventure, to physical fitness, to opportunity, to money, right? I go through 50 different ones. I said, great, there's 50 here. Now they all look good, but we can't prioritize everything. I want you to go through and choose your top 10 out of this list of 50. So already they have to eliminate 40. They go, great. So they go through, they get to 10. Good. You got 10? Good. Now let's get it down to 5. What are your top 5? Good. Now let's take it down to your top 3. Okay. Now you have your top 3 values. Now pull out your calendar from the last month. Show me how you've spent your time reflects these values. And what we see is either there's alignment or there's a disconnect.
Yeah.
And so I think the first thing to get people kind of putting that ego on full cylinders in a good, healthy way is your vision aligned with your values? Because I think there's a lot of people out there who have really big to-do lists, but as they look at the list and where they're trying to get to, they haven't stopped and done the hard work of reflecting on, is this really what matters to me? And I think right now is such a good time, with this coronavirus pandemic. We're recording this today on May the 20th. So a lot of us are either in or coming out of lockdown. This has been a great opportunity to step back and press pause on the busyness of the treadmill of day to day and go, stop, wait, hold on. Like, what's really important? Like you used the word legacy earlier. What's the legacy that I want to leave behind? And what do I need to start building today to make that happen? So for me, having a healthy ego is a huge part of making all that happen.
Are you having, so I've recently listened to a podcast about this, and the thought leader that was speaking, this guy's a CEO of a company, and he's big into optimization of all different aspects of life. And he's doing, a lot of great things in the world, helping people. He was talking about the same thing about what you want to do or your core values, like doing a check-in, whether it's daily or weekly, and seeing if you are still in alignment with those things. What are you telling the people that you're connecting with in terms of, okay, you've identified the 3 things that are most important to you and you want to make sure that you're aligned with those things. How are they staying on task to make sure that they're still following those things to, where they want to go?
Yeah, you talked about check-in here, Jesse. I mean, I'm a huge fan of data, right? Because data doesn't lie. Data is data. And so whether it's a weekly, monthly, daily check-in, but having some kind of process and some kind of practice where you can take that objective stock of what is going on. I grew up in the era of Star Trek, right? The original series, right? With Leonard Nimoy and William Shatner. And I always say, like, when it comes to data, we all got to be a little bit more Spock-like, right?
Yeah.
So when you look back on your week and you're reflecting on, did I live in accordance and in alignment with my values? If I did, and if I didn't, same answer. Fascinating, right? That's what Spock would always say. Fascinating, right? So how can I not get sucked into the emotional drama of it and go, all right, so if I didn't live in alignment with my value this week, what did I choose to do instead? And why? Because there's such great gold to be mined in the answer there. It's like, oh, well, I really wanted to spend time with my family, but my boss asked me to stay late on this project, and I really felt like I couldn't say no. Well, what's up with that? What's that about? What's at risk for you to say no? Or what's your relationship like with them? So there's suddenly I'm on to a whole deeper exploration in terms of understanding my drivers. It's so easy for so many of us to just react to what people and the world around us wants. And if we're not really clear on what our agenda needs to be, someone else's agenda will take front and center.
For sure. Yeah, you have to be convicted in your values. And I think that also when you talk about data, whenever you're presented with new facts or new information with a compelling argument, it might it might be contradictory to what your current belief system is, but if you find it to be true, you have to be able to pivot too. So I think it's important to have those values going into things. I think it's important to stand for something or fall for everything kind of thing, but also be open for change, because I think life is constant change. So I want to switch gears a little bit, because I'm a fan of Quentin Tarantino, and I love how he tells stories that are nonlinear. And I think it makes for a more interesting story. So for you, your story personally is very interesting in your life. And just give a little context on your journey for the listeners and the viewers of kind of your story. And you can dive as deep as you need to. And then what that has made sense for you to do what you're doing today. Like, how did you go from where you were to what you're doing now?
Sure. Yeah. Certainly when I was 7 years old, I didn't think, oh, I'm going to go write books about leadership. So certainly not. But that being said, if I look back on a through line in my life, it's definitely been focused on people. I've always been fascinated by people. Why do people do what they do, behave the way they behave? And I think it has a lot to do with my fairly unusual childhood. So, of course, at the time, it didn't seem unusual, because when you're a kid, you think what you're going through is normal because you have nothing else to compare it to. So for me, I grew up in Flushing, Queens, New York, and that's not unusual. Lots of people have done that. I was raised by a single mom, not so unusual. Also by my grandmother, again, not so unusual. The unusual part comes in the fact of who my mother and my grandmother are, or were. In my grandmother's case, she's passed on since then. But basically, my mother and my grandmother are both Holocaust survivors. So they were born, my mom was born in 1935 in Belgium. And from 1942 until the end of the war, my mother was actually taken away from her mother at the age of 7 and put in hiding. And she spent 3 years through the Belgian underground living with, we'll call them foster families, keeping her safe. And she was moved from house to house. Sometimes she lived in private houses, sometimes in a convent. She was given a fake name, a false identity. She had her hair dyed blonde and given a whole backstory that she had to remember in case she was ever arrested and captured. Imagine being 7 or 8. I mean, I think back, my kids are now even older than that, and I still can't wrap my head around what she went through. My grandmother at the time tried to stay safe. She was actually arrested, and she was actually brought to a holding camp that was the holding camp in Belgium that had transport troop trains going to Auschwitz. And I saw her name on a list. She was number 181 on the next transport that was supposed to go that never left. In fact, Belgium was liberated before she left. So it was right at the end of the war. Well, my mother and my grandmother were reunited at the end of the war. And pretty much the rest of the family had been killed. And as you can imagine, Jesse, that experience shaped their identity and their relationships so strongly. So I'm born in 1968, in New York City. And yet these are my primary parents whose worldview has been shaped by literally being hunted for their lives. And so we talk about people having a survivalistic mentality. Totally was their experience. So I noticed when I was off, in elementary school and beyond, that when I would go to school, the old song, one of these things is not like the other. Like, that was exactly my experience, right? I'd be at home, which was very kind of dark and brooding and just heavy, this heaviness all the time. And I'd go to school and it was light and people were happy. And I'd go to my friends' houses and their parents were just so different from my own experience. And so I think for me, being interested in people was my early way of trying to make sense of my experience. And so I ended up going and studying a bunch of stuff in college. I mean, I was a musician. My father's family are musicians. So I got involved playing the violin at the age of 5 and was really involved with all that. I went to the high school that was made famous in the movie Fame, if you ever know that movie. So I went to that high school in New York City. And then I went to a liberal arts college where I dabbled in a bunch of everything, really not knowing what I wanted to do other than I wanted to be happy. And I found myself studying psychology and Buddhist scripture and theater and just dabbled in a lot of stuff. And from there, I went on. A number of my friends were putting on interview suits and interviewing for jobs at advertising companies and investment banking. And at the time, I was thinking, you're selling your soul. What are you doing? Like, you can't go there. Why? I said, that was so not me. I was not ready for that. But I went on to a professional acting school, actually, afterwards. I started at a graduate drama program for 3 years where I was really under the microscope, getting a sense of how do I think and immersing myself in the characters of great drama, Shakespeare, Moliere, Ibsen, Pinter, like all these great playwrights, and learning about life through great dramatic works of art. Well, I came back to New York after I finished. This was out in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I was in grad school. I came back to New York and I got involved doing arts and education teaching work in schools. And I was working in schools. I worked in prisons. I did a whole residency at Rikers Island. There's a whole junior high school and high school at Rikers Island. Most people don't even realize that exists, where you have incarcerated youth and they have these youth programs. And I tell you, if you can teach a bunch of convicts at Rikers Island, you can work pretty much anywhere. So it was a great place to cut your teeth. It was really, and I was working with 20-year pro teachers, so they were fantastic. And from there, doing educational training, I then moved over to doing leadership training and consulting in organizations. And at the same time, this is kind of a very important mid-step, I got involved. I went to a personal growth workshop. I mentioned earlier about this leadership training that I had been involved with staff selection. So I got involved with a not-for-profit organization, which is called the Mankind Project, which is all about empowering men to missions of service in the world, empowering themselves to help themselves, their families, and their communities. And it was here I suddenly met, I was 25. Most of the men that were involved were in their 40s and 50s, because generally men approach that kind of stuff when they hit a midlife crisis. I guess I just had mine really early at the age of 25. But what I suddenly discovered was, oh, these were the men I was looking for, because suddenly I realized I had new role models that, oh, it's okay. You can be a man and you can be strong and you can be vulnerable. You know, you can be sensitive about feelings and be fiercely competitive. You know, we don't have to choose up sides. And on that weekend, the initial training weekend I went through, they have you go through a visualization and mission creation process. And what I came out of on the weekend was a very clear mission in the world. And my mission, and it hasn't changed in over 25 years, my mission is to create a vibrant and alive world by kindling the fire of brilliance in people. And suddenly I realized that helping people to be as excited as I was and transforming themselves was like a high no drug could possibly ever deliver. So I became a personal and professional development junkie, as it were. I went to workshops, I read books, I've been to Tony Robbins fire walking. I mean, I've done a lot of stuff.
Did you actually do the fire walking yourself?
I did do the fire walking myself.
How did that go?
It was awesome. I'll put it this way, it's a great metaphor, because it shows you the power of belief. And I think anything that is experiential, that you feel in your bones, has a shift. It's a super, now, will I say it changed my life? I'll say it was a piece. It was a piece. I think it's a great metaphor. And there's so many great things. I mean, there's so many things, but ultimately, no one else is going to change your life for you. Only you can do that for yourself. But I've had so many great mentors and books and tools and tips and techniques. So for me, I'm at a point where I want to be able to keep giving back. And so this book that I just recently released is a distillation of a lot of the lessons and stories that I learned, because I've always wanted to write a book. And I think back in 2010, I had a mentor who said, Alain, writers write. I went, okay, good to know. So I started, instead of writing a book, I wrote a blog. I started a blog. I thought, I can commit to writing 500 words. And I'll tell you, Jesse, the first couple of years, that blog sucked. I mean, it was really not good. And though
talk about that a little bit, I think, because there's a lot of people that are on the same path with either, and I want to talk about the process, the pre-delivery of the book itself, but I want to talk about the blogging too, because there's people that are doing that right now that need help.
Here's the thing, if you're out there, first of all, kudos on you for doing it. You have to have the courage to do crappy work. Because let's face it, the creative process is messy. And when you're reading a finished book, like if you read my book, it has been edited left, down, right, center, over and over and over again. You are looking at literally like draft 65. You're not looking at draft 1. Just like when you see a professional basketball player, you are not seeing the hours and hours and hours of them in the practice gym, dribbling and learning all those basic drills. You don't see that. So what we tend to judge ourselves based on the finished product. What we need to do is enjoy the process. So if you have something to say, you want to blog, write and keep writing and just stay with it and take pleasure in, like for me, it was Saturdays. I'd publish on Saturdays. And I think at this point, my audience was maybe my mom sometimes. Like that was it. Like maybe, like she's like, did you read it? She's like, did you post again? Like, yeah, I guess you didn't read it. Yeah. But literally it was like, but for me, it was just, I said I would, and the pleasure was in, I published this and this thing existed in the world now, in the blogosphere suddenly. And so I started, in the first couple of years, like I said, really sucked. But after about 2 years, I started to find my voice. And I put myself on a consistent blogging schedule of I publish every single Saturday, and I committed to that. And I did not miss a Saturday for over 4 years, Jesse. And so 4 years later, I have 200 some odd blog posts. And then I start reviewing them and looking for overarching themes. And what I found was I had a whole stream of blogs that had to do with connection, a whole stream that had to do with communication, and a whole stream that had to do with collaboration. Well, the subtitle of my book are The 3 Secrets That Build Strong Leaders, their connection, communication, and collaboration. So I ended up repurposing a bunch of those stories, and those stories gave me a structural framework when I put a book proposal together. So I didn't have to just sit down with a blank page. See, there's nothing that is worse for a creative than a blank canvas or a blank page, because it's like, what am I going to say? What do I have to say? I'm not that important. As opposed to, here's a structure. And so my advice to anyone, if you're interested in either blogging or doing a podcast, is, I have a friend who's a stand-up comic, and I had this is relevant, by the way. I'll tell you what I'll say in a second. So I said to him, I said, Joe, what is it? Like, you are so funny. He's like, I am no funnier than anybody else. All I do is I take better notes. So whether it's your phone as a voice recorder or you have a little piece of paper and a pad in your back pocket, just notice your life and take notes. So like, oh, that'll make for an interesting story. That would be a really good podcast episode. That would make for a really good vlog. This is where the content creation comes. And if you keep working at it, it will get better. I do a lot of work on helping people to become more innovative. And all the research on innovation shows that the best way to produce high quality content is to produce high quantity of content. So basically, the more you have to choose from, the better likelihood you're going to create great stuff.
Yep.
And so that's a little story on kind of how I got to where I am.
Okay. And so now you're into the book writing process. At what point, and how was that coinciding with like building your brand, building your consultancy, essentially? How did all those marry together?
Yeah. So one of the things, and I remember I had a friend who does work on influencer marketing, and she's talked about, you need to build an email list. You want to have an email list because you don't want to have to be, victim of all the major social media platforms. You want to be able to have people on your own platform. So a bunch of years ago on my website, I started an email list, and I thought, and this was another thing that another mentor said, because I said, how am I going to build my network? And they said, well, there's a lot of different ways that you can network. You have to find the ways that work for you. Now, between you and me, Jesse, and I guess all of the listeners now, if you told me, okay, Alain, every Thursday morning you have to go to a BNI, a Business Networking International breakfast meeting, I would say, can I go to the dentist for a root canal instead?
Right.
Like, I don't like those kind of situations. So I know that that would not be a good place for me to network. And in fact, doing the whole hey, let's get together one-on-one for coffee, I find it really, for the most part, really draining. I have to drive somewhere, I have to meet someone. Is this I feel like I'm dating all the time. Look, I'm married already. Yeah. I don't want to date. I'm already married. And I thought, gosh, what can I do? Well, I was leading trainings and workshops. And I thought, well, here's a group of people. How can I stay in touch with them more in a way that's going to serve them? And so what I ended up doing is, there's an author, you might know him. His name is Adam Grant. He's a professor at Wharton. And he had this great monthly newsletter. And in his newsletter, he would list about 4 or 5 articles that he loved, and he would have links to the articles, but give a 2-sentence distillation summary. So you could see so he had done the hard work of letting you know what it was about, and then you could click on it. So he had a whole section on what I've been reading, and then he had this whole section of what I've been writing, and he'd have links to his articles. And I thought, this is genius, because it was a way to stay in touch and giving people value. And I thought, perfect. So I basically shamelessly stole his format. And that's the same format. I've been doing that for 5 years. So I have a monthly newsletter, and that's pretty much the format. And it's amazing how, we talk about the ripples in the pond and you don't know where they go. I have people who will come to me and say, I read this article in your newsletter and it helped me to redesign my training program or work differently with this coaching client. So it's a way for me to continually add value without selling, because ultimately I'm not trying to sell, I'm trying to serve. And at the same time, there have people that have come back to me and said, oh, do you do executive coaching? Oh, by the way, well, they're now clients. So, or do you do a workshop? You can come into my team. Yes, I do. So every so often those things will happen. But Here's the funny part about that, Jesse, is it's never a 1-to-1 ratio. Where you think you put the effort in and where you think it's going to return to you almost never does. And then out of the blue, someone or someone's is going to show up and they're going to want to contract with you. And you're going to, how did you find me? And it's this random group, but you have to keep putting yourself out there, both the network and the content. You have to keep putting that out there. And it gets easier. And you have to enjoy the process. Again, going back to what we talked about earlier around values, for me, it took me a long time to write this book, but a part of the reason why is my kids are born in 2004 and 2007. My priority was being a dad, much more than being some hotshot best-selling author. I was more concerned about being home. I didn't need all of the accolades in the same way. That wasn't what was driving me. Now that I'm out here, do I want to be famous? The short answer is yes. And by the way, the long answer is I had a coach who had to coach me to that because I said, I don't want to be famous. Because I said, I just want to help people. And they said, what's with this not wanting to be famous crap? They kind of called me on it. And I said, well, it's not what's driving me. I said, if you were famous, how would the world be a better place?
You'd help more people.
I would help more people. Exactly. So what they helped me to realize was fame is not a bad thing. It all depends. Like for me, in my mind, if you said, Alain, do you want to be recognized for the way you help people? Absolutely, I do. I guess in my mind, I was thinking, I want to be famous means, I want to change my last name to Kardashian and have my own reality show. And that's not the kind of famous I'm looking for, but I totally get it. So
they have a way of changing people, the Kardashians, for sure.
They do. Yeah, exactly. So for me, this whole sense of how you take your own track is so important. And it's also really important to not compare yourself to anybody else because, with social media, it's so easy to look at those pictures, whether it's Instagram, you pick it, doesn't matter, your platform of choice, and you'll feel less than because you're getting a two-dimensional sanitized version of the most amazing reality that people are sharing. And also, you are taking one small data point, right? You're taking a picture and you're going, oh gosh, like for example, even someone who's, they've made a lot of money. That is one part of a larger whole. Yeah, look, I have no problem with money. And if that's your only litmus test to compare to, you have no idea what their personal relationships are like, what their mental health is like. You really don't. So the comparison game, you can't win it. The only way to win it is to stop playing. So really, those are some things that I've had to learn sometimes the hard way. But I think the sooner that we can get off of that treadmill, the better.
I think a big piece of that came from a self-awareness of knowing what you liked and what you didn't like when it came to the networking piece and going back to when you showed up at these events or you did these like BNI, which I was a part of for a while. And that was like my first experience into professional networking years ago in 2011. And I will say it's helped me tremendously for where I'm at today, but I wouldn't go back to a group like that ever again either. And it's just because I've personally figured out for myself what I like and what I don't like. And it was good for you to identify that and pivot to something that would make you happy. And then also you can show up better for people if you're in a better mindset versus showing up to something like physically and saying, hey, I don't really want to be here. You're not going to bring a lot of value into that meeting. And so you're going to show up poorly for yourself and then also for the person that you're connecting with. Yeah. And so for you to pivot and say, I still want to do this at a different level, but like you just change the format, that's huge. And I think that also the second piece that came out of that, your point was with the branding and the consistent content that you have to put out. And so also finding a medium for that, whether that's blogging, whether that's the monthly newsletter. For me, it was this podcast. And so, I'm an entrepreneur, but I also have this podcast, and this podcast has done amazing things for my business. And it wasn't designed that way. It wasn't, and it's like you said, you never know where things are going to come from. So when this podcast, it was born of the idea that I love to listen to other podcasters. I love to learn. I'm a student at heart. And I figured I knew enough amazing people that I wanted to shine a light on them and give them a bigger voice than they already had. If possible, that would kind of be my way to help them. And it's turned into this beautiful way to meet amazing people, hear incredible stories, put it out in the ether to help them. And then also, a lot of times the people that come on the show, either themselves or they know someone, and they're like, hey, well, what do you do? And tell me about your wealth management business. And like, maybe I can work with you there. And they become clients or they refer me to some. So I think that being creative and not being afraid to fail and showing up every day and doing things that may be hard or difficult. Like when you said you started your blog, it wasn't the best blog in the world. And then, X amount of years later, you feel like it's night and day. It's all about the process. Like even with this podcast, when it first started, we're almost coming up on 2 years now. And I believe you're somewhere like episode 68, 69, somewhere there. But it's like when I go back and look at episodes 1 through 12, which was kind of going to be my first season before I decided not to do seasons because I want to do like the Joe Rogan thing and have like 1,000 episodes. I think that I would look back on those episodes and be so hypercritical of like the way the format was or how I was speaking or the way the things looked. But you have to grow through those growing pains, and you have to learn that you're not going to start at the top. You have to start from the bottom. So,
yeah. And also, I think what you're saying, episode 68 and beyond, is with the process is that, and we talk about this with leaders too. When people say about leaders, like, what are qualities that you want to be seen? And people say, I want to be charismatic or enthusiastic, inspiring. No one ever says, I want to be seen as being consistent, because consistent isn't sexy. And yet I would take consistency any day over any of those other three qualities, because well, you're in finance, and it's the power of compounding, right? When you compound interest over time, it multiplies. And what happens for so many people, and you probably know the podcast stats better than I do, is how many people start a podcast and give it up within 3 or 4 months because I'm not Joe Rogan yet.
right.
What? Joe Rogan wasn't Joe Rogan yet after 6 months either. I wrote a book. I'm not an Oprah. You know how long Oprah's been around for? Like, again, we overthink what we can get to, as opposed to every little bit counts. And so how do you move that forward and enjoy where you are? Because the fact is, that's where you are. There's nowhere else to be except being with who you are. And this, again, goes back to the power of, in leadership, I write a lot about this, about importance in connection, is that can you listen with purpose? And I'm sure you're familiar with the term holding space for other people.
For sure.
And I think about, what does that really mean? What holding space really means is parking your own agenda and your own ego and putting it to the side and being completely focused on somebody else and listening to them and thinking, how can I learn? What can I learn? And how can I support wherever you are? And being that present is such a gift, particularly in this day and age where so many people are distracted. So I think enjoy the process and be present to all of it. And even when it fails, go, great, what did I learn from today? Quick story on that. So while I was out trying to get endorsements for the book, I was reaching out to a ton of people. And by the way, key to all this is make each query really personal. Like, don't do a form email and send it off like, dear, fill in name here, would you please endorse my book? Why should I? So I wrote to people who had really influenced me, and I shared what books they'd influenced and how they'd influenced and if they were written in the book. And one of the people I wrote to is a guy named Daniel Kahneman, who wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. He's also won the Nobel Prize. He was one of the pioneers in the field of behavioral economics. Well, the amazing thing about the reason I'm telling this story is because Danny Kahneman, Danny, like I know him. I'm talking like, yeah, Danny and me. No, it wasn't like that. So I should call him, Nobel Prize laureate Kahneman. It's really Mr. Kahneman wrote me back and he said, thank you, but no, I only endorse books that I know the original research that's been done on it. And instead of, putting my tail between my legs, that afternoon, people say, how's your day? I said, it is awesome. I just got a rejection email from a Nobel Prize winner. Because if I look back a year before that, there's no way that the inside of me would have had the courage to ever do that. And the fact that I went for that, and yeah, I got a rejection, but the sky did not fall. The sun kept spinning and I got to live another day. What we think, what's at risk really for us to step out and try stuff? Really think about that long and hard. What is at risk for you to step beyond what you think is comfortable? Because that's where the growth happens. It's in that zone.
The comfort zones are broken when you get uncomfortable, and it's cliche, but it's true, because you're forced to. It's the fight or flight mechanism kicks in.
Yeah.
Do you stand up and charge forward, or do you retreat?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's been lots of studies on the science of what motivates human behavior. And it turns out the most recent studies, it used to be the pain pleasure. People, go towards pleasure and avoid pain. It actually is what we try to do is regulate discomfort. It's like if we're feeling discomfort, uncomfortable, we look to get rid of that discomfort. So if I'm hungry, I want to eat, right? If I'm bored, I want to scroll. If I'm lonely, I'll check Facebook, whatever that is. And for a lot of us, it's unconscious. And so realizing that part of the growth and part of being a leader in your life is getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and noticing that and going, it's basically you're trading the short-term discomfort of now for the long-term success. Anyone who's exercised for more than a day can tell you while you're doing it, it doesn't feel good, but you've already associated the habit to the
Yep.
point where you start to associate, oh, actually, this feels good now because it feels really good later. And then you sort of become addicted in a healthy way to process of exercising. So are we willing to trade off? Because you know what? There are days where I didn't want to write that blog post for every Saturday. I could have stayed in bed, but it's the same thing for anything. I want to hang out and do nothing. Yeah, you can. And then what will I have at the end of the year? Not
Nothing.
much. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, success leaves clues for sure. And then you look at some of the most successful people that are still good people, that they come across as genuine, humble people. And one that comes to mind is Will Smith. And he has a famous phrase saying that your best life is on the other side of fear. And that just ties right back into being uncomfortable and doing the things that productively, once you do them, they're going to make you stronger mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. So talking about almost a spiritual strength, being present, you brought that up. And that's something that's really big for everybody, for family members, for business owners, for anything that you're doing in life, being present. Because that goes back to also further back when you said, enjoying the process, enjoying the journey, and not just waiting for the goal, right?
Yeah,
because so there's people that'll go and spend 20 years with Tibetan monks or different places in the world to try to learn how to be present, meditation, journaling, all these different things. What is your experience been in terms of how you're present, and then also teaching other people what they can do in their daily lives to show up a little bit better by being present in their lives?
Yeah, great question. And I'm going to answer it with a story about a trip to the dental hygienist. So I have this dental hygienist named Jackie, and she is the best. In fact, the reason I go to the dentist's office is because Jackie is such a good hygienist. She is like a Da Vinci with a dental pick. Every tooth is a blank canvas and she cleans it up. So I remember being in the dentist chair getting my teeth cleaned by Jackie, and I stopped her. I said, Jackie, I got a question for you. You're the dental professional. There's all these toothbrushes on the market. There are battery-powered toothbrushes. There are sonic-powered toothbrushes. There are bristle-head toothbrushes. Tell me, you're the professional. What is the best toothbrush out there? So she stopped and she smiled. She looked at me. She said, oh, that's easy. The best toothbrush? It's the one you'll use twice a day. And so I bring this up, Jesse, because you said, in terms of being present, what's the best practice? There's a ton of ways to do it. I think find what works for you and use it twice a day or once a day, just having something that works for you. And there have been at times in my life, I've done different things. For a while, I was really into yoga, and that helped me to be really centered. Well, I moved away from New York where my yoga studio was. I stopped doing yoga there, and I got into some other stuff. And then I got into CrossFit for a while. And what I found was CrossFit was really good for some things, but it wasn't necessarily for keeping me present. And I actually added a meditation practice to that. And again, my meditation practice, it isn't fancy. It's basically sitting and breathing. Now, there are different tools and gizmos. Like my wife got me a couple of years ago for Father's Day. It's called the Muse headband, which is basically like, you're familiar with these things. So there's different, there's one. I'm not saying go out and buy a Muse, by the way. If you want to, you're welcome to. But it's a way for you, whatever it is, it's going to help you to stick with a process. I mean, the thing about Muse, like a lot of behavior habit change apps, it gamifies things. So it's a way for you to have some fun with it.
Yep.
So find what works and then use it. So the tools can be as simple as paper and pen or a cushion and your breath. It really doesn't matter. What matters is that you find something and that you do it.
I think that's a huge point too, something that's going to keep you sticking to it instead of having the I have to do this mentality, like I get to do this and I look forward to this. That mindset shift is going to make things a lot easier on people that are adopting new habits. Yeah. And just having that accountability potentially with someone else that's doing it with you, or a coach. You talked about you have a coach, and I've had a coach for as long as I can remember through different iterations of life. Talk a little bit about that relationship. I think that's a pretty good segue for you and I to talk about, is the importance of having someone who's, ahead of you in life. Maybe they've done different things. They've had different experiences. What are some benefits that you've seen in having a coach, and how do you utilize and leverage that relationship today?
It's interesting. I have got different coaches in different capacities in life. So it's funny because when we say coach, there's sort of this assumption that we're all meaning the same thing. And I've got coaches who do more coaching, as in they ask me questions. Like the strict coaching is much more, they're using questioning techniques to be a sounding board for me to come up with my own solutions. I also have people who we might call coaches who are really more mentors and actually give advice at times. And sometimes it's the same person who shifts hats. So they're all really valuable. I'd say the number one characteristic to a good coaching relationship has got to be honesty. It's got to be, a level of honesty. And the honesty isn't with a coach, it's the honesty with yourself.
Yep.
Are you willing to have this relationship and be honest enough with yourself to both give feedback about yourself and get feedback from your coach that is going to enable you to grow? Because from my take, and I've been doing personal work since 1994, personal development work, which I think frankly is the same thing as leadership development work. They're really the same.
I agree.
I would say the number one thing that has helped me grow is getting honest feedback from the outside, from others that I trust, who I know is giving it, even if it's really tough, are telling me the truth. Because the fact is, when the sixth and the seventh and the eighth person all say, hey, Alain, you can come across like a steamroller in meetings with people because you're so driven towards wanting to help the client that you forget the team along the way. When it's the eighth person that said that, I have to start going, again, going back to data, fascinating, 8 versus 1. Maybe they have a point here, right? So I have to, and that, by the way, was real feedback that I did get from 8 people. So I think with a coach, it's having that relationship. And also, it's got to be someone that you feel comfortable opening up yourself to.
That's key. That's key. That's the one thing I've found, not to cut you off, but like having someone, there's some sort of rapport. You kind of feel like they're part of your tribe some sort of way. They can be a completely different person, completely different life experience, but there's that common tissue that pulls you to get together. Yeah.
And we call that, and with leadership, I call that, creating psychological safety. That basically when you're around them, you feel that you have resources, that you're resilient, that you can draw on your own capacity. Whether other people, we all know those people that were around them, we're a little bit on edge. We're walking on eggshells. Like I'm trying to, if you feel like it's a coach that you have to impress somehow, probably not the best fit. Because the fact is, a lot of us spend a lot of our lives, I'd say, and again, I'm generalizing here, but having seen and done the research on this, a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to impress people, and then they start to become someone they're not. So a little shockingly sad statistic is that 61% of the US workforce self-identifies as putting on a mask when they go to work.
I believe it.
They cover up their identity because they don't feel safe bringing their whole selves to work.
And that's probably not even the full number, because those are the people that responded that were truthful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
It's probably like 80-20 at best. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the coaching thing comes back to, can people feel safe to be fully honest? And then obviously, seeing and also having, if you're going to go and hire a coach, make sure they have a clear process.
Yep.
You want to know that they know where they're taking you, because they are your guide. And even though it is your landscape, the process isn't actually all that different than it is working with other people. So they should have a clear coaching process that they work through. And when I intake with new clients, I talk about this, and we actually walk through, because in our initial open discovery consulting, we call it the chemistry call, right? Making sure it's a good fit for exactly what we talk about.
I have a likability call. It's so funny. It's the first step for a client or.
Because you want to make sure that this is a good fit on both sides, frankly. Yep. I don't want your money. I'm not here for the money. I mean, the money is a reflection of value. If that works out, great. But otherwise, it's not a good fit. And by the way, if you want a bunch of other coaches, I'll give you 15 names to go and call them too, for sure. But what I want to do is walk them through and make them really clear on the process, because what people need to be able to do is surrender to the process and the structure so they can bring their full selves to that, which is what the full selves we're saying is their honest full selves. And I want people to be able to do that without questioning, where's this going? Because that eats away at our ability to be fully honest.
Yep. And be present and be like, maybe you put yourself on guard a little bit because you're not really sure what's happening. So I can't talk any more enough highly than you have about having a coach and a mentor. It definitely changes the game in so many ways. You can live a fuller, richer life in so many different capacities. But I want to get back to cracking the leadership code, because we touched on it a little bit. I want to talk about the experience that you've had with it and where it's led you to, and diving deep into some of the practicality of the book, because it is very practical, and how that's actually helped other people from their experience by reading the book or getting into the material.
Yeah, it's been really exciting. So the book launched on March the 24th, and it's gotten great traction. It was actually released as the #1 new release in business communication on Amazon from its pre-sales, which was really fantastic. I'm really honored to have that happen. And I've had some great stories with readers. So for example, one reader is an executive coach, and he read, there's a couple of chapters on empathy. And he said, oh my gosh, I have a couple of clients that are really struggling with this. I'm going to buy 2 copies, and they need to read this because this explains exactly what it is. So as I talked about in my work, leading teams for the last 25 years, I'm an adult educator, and I know how adults learn, and that there's a few things that need to be in place for learning to start to stick. Number one, it's got to be engaging. So the book is filled with stories. I mean, I don't know about you, but when someone says, "Oh, I got this business book for you to read," now shoot me now. Like, oh gosh, another boring business book filled with dense, complex theory I don't really understand.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I was number one, it's filled with stories. It's super engaging. It's conversational like we're having right now. It's also backed up with research, because when people say, "Where'd you come up with this?" I can't say, well, I got this great cocktail napkin where I drew this model on. So it's all based on the latest neuroscience and psychological research that's out there. And it's also got to be really practical and actionable. So I want to share just a couple of quick action tips. So the book's got the 3 subsections, right? Connection, communication, and collaboration. So in connection, the big things we get into are the power of empathy. So we need empathy. And the other big thing is the importance as a leader of being credible. So I want to share a couple of quick tips that are in the book, that are just little tastes of some simple tools. So the number one thing you can do to increase your credibility, show up to all your meetings on time. Like, boom, that's it. That's simple. Because being on time or not on time is the easiest thing in the world to measure, right? Because you're either there or you're not, right? Jesse's here or he's not. And it sends a very clear message either way. So if you want to start to build your brand, being the person that people can set their watch to sends a huge, powerful message to them. So it's a really simple thing that you can do. Another thing, we talked about it before around credibility, is consistency, right? So yeah, it's great to say thank you once, but again, I'm married for almost 22 years now. I can't pull off and say to my wife, Mary, "Oh, Mary, I said I love you on our wedding day. I think it still counts," right? No, like you need to be consistent with things in life. So how do you stay consistent? So lots of tools around connection, then communication. Communication is always rated as the number one business challenge. And so we take a look at what are the things that get in the way of communication, as well as I offer 6 different tips on how to be a better communicator. A quick tip: asking for a receipt. If you think about it in life, we use receipts all the time when it comes to purchases, right? If you buy a candy bar, you might spend 50 or 75 cents. You might say, "I don't need a receipt." But Jesse, you would never dream of buying a house or a car without getting a receipt, because a receipt is a proof of a completed transaction. Well, in communication, asking for a receipt is getting a completed transaction confirmation that what you said has actually been what's been understood. And a great example comes from the fast food industry. So back in the 1980s, which I still remember because I was still around, I was
there
alive.
too.
You were there. So in the 1980s is when drive-throughs in all the fast food places started happening. In the first few years, the drive-through process was a nightmare. It was really common for people to drive up and place their order at the intercom, and then they drive up and pick up their food, and the order would be filled with mistakes. And this went on for literally 2 years. This was across the industry. And then suddenly, drive-through mistake rates just started to plummet. You might be thinking, well, what the heck happened? What new technology? Super simple. The employees started repeating the order back to the customer before they process it. So let me share, I got that right, sir. 2 cheeseburgers, 1 hamburger, 3 fries, and 3 Cokes. Is that right? Simple as that, right? Just to make sure that it was completely clear.
Checking for understanding.
Checking for understanding. And it's amazing how often in our business meetings, we discuss all these really important and valuable details. And then, okay, we're done. Good. We don't stop and confirm. Okay, Jesse, what's your understanding of what we just agreed to? Like, taking that time in the meeting before moving on will save you so much time down the road. So again, a simple, practical tool. So the book is loaded with simple, practical tools on how to make your emails better, how to make your meetings better, how to be a more motivating and collaborative leader. So the book is filled with different pieces to make
How can people find it?
Sure, people can find the book. It's got its own website at www.crackingtheleadershipcode.com. While you're there, you can actually download the first chapter and preview the book. It'll also connect you with my general website. So if you want to learn more about my consulting, training, speaking, and coaching work, all under the umbrella of helping people to become better leaders, you can send me an email, or you can also connect with me on LinkedIn right from there.
I love it. And just before we close it out, I want people to hear more about what you have going on for the rest of this year. I know we're in the middle of a pandemic and we don't really know what the future is going to hold, but what is it that you're working on or towards for the completion of 2020?
Yeah. So what I'm doing right now, so most of my work was in person. So now that we're not in person and it's looking like the rest of 2020, most in-person meetings won't be happening. So I'm working on pivoting my business to being online, virtual. So I'm in the process of taking in-person trainings that are based on the content from the book and converting them to online trainings, either small group or large group trainings, doing that. So that's what I'm focused on. I'm also moving back to the US. I was in Massachusetts 2 years ago, and I'll be moving back from Europe. So that's a big project because we're closing our Dutch business and our Dutch home down. And if we think that we have a lot of legal loopholes in the US, there's even more in a country like this to kind of unwind from now that we wound in. So we're really busy closing everything down so we can move back. And our kids, my son will be a sophomore in high school next year. And so we'll be moving that. So that's the big project going on. And then to continue to promote the book and to be out speaking, training, coaching, and helping people to become the leaders they want to be.
I love it. Thank you so much. We'll have some links in the show notes where people can go ahead and find more about you and the book and what you've got going on in your life. It's been amazing. It's been a powerful story. I think it's going to help some people kind of figure out which direction they need to take. And it's been my pleasure. So Alain, thank you so much.
Jesse, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you too. And I look forward to the next one. He's the amazing Alain Hunkins. I'm Jesse T. Catch us next week on the newest episode of the Jesse T Show.